A very warm welcome to everyone who has joined us for this distinguished high-level dialogue. I would like to thank UN Environment Programme and the Ministry of Environment and Water Malaysia for the invitation to moderate this discussion. We have in the past 3 days heard from a wide range of speakers provide action-oriented insights on topics of accelerating solutions to reduce plastic waste. To set the context for today's conversation, I want to highlight some of the key points from the proceedings. In day one, we heard how a new wave of environmentally conscious consumers and innovations in packaging design can tackle the plastic crisis in Southeast Asia. Even though the COVID-19 pandemic has reversed progress made around plastic waste to a certain extent, there is no denying this global sense of urgency around the issue, with governments enacting into law policies to tackle the scourge of plastic, including the Malaysia government's newly launched National Marine Litter Policy and Action Plan. There is an investment gap that needs to be addressed, as well as greater collaboration fostered among key stakeholders in the industry. On day two, we heard about the role of cities and the role of legally binding frameworks, such as the Basel Convention, and the importance of extended producer responsibility frameworks, which is still in its infancy in ASEAN. Circular economy advocates have also provided examples of business models that ensure plastic products remain at the highest economic value for as long as possible, staying out of our waterways and oceans. Today, we have a very distinguished panel who will provide further insights as to how we can capitalize on this momentum and accelerate solutions through multi-stakeholder action. Before we begin, it is my pleasure now to introduce Ms. Maimunah Mohammad Sharif, Executive Director of UN Habitat, who will be sharing with us a message to kick off this dialogue. Ms. Maimunah, over to you.
Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Tuan Ibrahim Tuan Man, Minister of Environment and Water, Kementerian Alam Sekitar dan Air (KASA), Ms. Inga Anderson, Executive Director of UNEP, Ms. Karima El Khoury, the Resident Coordinator of the United Nations for Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, wherever you are. It is indeed a great honor to be invited to address all of you today, both in Malaysia and virtually across the region, ahead of this important high-level opening session at the SEA of Solutions 2021, organized by UNEP and the coordinating body of the Seas of East Asia, with the generous support by Sweden. Having the theme of accelerating solutions to reduce plastic waste, let me share my capacities as a former mayor of Penang. Plastic waste was regularly an area of concern, either washing into our shores or from waste generated. Stretching across 130,000 kilometers of coastline, the countries of Southeast Asia have a tremendous role to play in the active address of plastic waste pollution by developing sound environmental governance measures. Working together between the public and the private sector will be essential to implement effective solid waste management practices that seek to address waste at the source. As a society, we simply cannot continue to consume and dispose of waste the way that we currently are, producing 2 billion tons of waste globally and throwing away 99% of the stuff we buy within 6 months. This is not only unsustainable, but as we are witnessing, such waste is clogging up our rivers, waterways, and ecosystems, while leading to tremendous impacts on ocean environments. This makes the objective of the SEA of Solutions 2021 this year ever more critical in addressing the scourge of plastic waste pollution. Without any intervention, the negative impact on people, especially on low and middle income regions, least developed countries, and even landlocked developing countries will continue to grow. Already, each year, it is estimated at least 8 million tons of plastic is finding its way into the world's ocean with irrefutable consequences. On behalf of UN Habitat, we are grateful for our collaboration with UNEP, including in Seremban, Malaysia, and several other countries in supporting waste assessments using our Waste Wise Cities tool. Let me encourage you all to continuously rethink waste management over the next few days and beyond while hearing from industry and government's experts. We each have a role to play in our daily life, as effective waste management starts at home. We can all make small adjustments with resounding cumulative effects. Thank you. Terima kasih.
Thank you for the inspiring message, Ms. Maimuna. It is now my delight to introduce to you our distinguished panel. Joining us today are Mr. Yukata Matsuzawa, the Director General of the Environmental Management Bureau, Ministry of Environment, Japan; Datuk Jana Santiran Munyanan, Deputy Secretary General Environment of Ministry of Environment and Water, Malaysia; Ms. Amy Frankel, Executive Secretary, Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals; Dr. Rolf Payet, Executive Secretary, Secretariat of Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions; Ms. Tessa Govers, Head of the Pollution-Free Ecosystems Unit, Marine and Freshwater Branch, Ecosystems Division, UNEP, as well as Mr. Novrizal Taha, Director of Solid Waste Management in the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Indonesia. Thank you, speakers, for joining us today. We have a lot of ground to cover, so I'm going to dive right in. And the first question is for Datuk Jana. Our discussion today focuses on accelerating solutions to reduce plastic waste in the region, and we've had a wide range of insights shared at the Sea of Solutions this week. What actionable outcomes have resonated with you, and what is the Malaysian government's strategy on plastic waste going forward?
Thank you, Ms. Jessica, and thank you for the introduction. I'm glad to share the Malaysian experience in how we are addressing marine plastic pollution. As we are aware, cumulatively, I think the speaker before have also highlighted on this, Puan Maimuna, that about 8 million tons of plastic enters the ocean annually, and Malaysia is ranked as the eighth in the world in terms of marine plastic pollution. Basically, we are quite aware of the problem, and if this issue is widespread, experienced everywhere, and has reached, in fact, into a crisis level. Grave as it is, we have the opportunity to turn the tide and reverse this condition. We're in control of the outlook of plastic pollution, and we basically understand that we have to act now, and or else we'll be facing more severe impacts, not just on the environmental front, but also on economic and health wise, if we keep things on a business as usual manner. Momentum, of course, is gaining and picking to arrive to some solutions at the global level, regional, and as well as the national level. Many initiatives are being undertaken at various platforms, which are very commendable. The idea of having a global plastic agreement, which has been mooted as a response to this issue, which will be further deliberated in United Nations Environment Assembly UNIA 5.2 next year. Noting this development, we are also aware that there's a need to match aspirations with concrete solutions and actions on the ground. Single-use plastics too has increased during the pandemic, particularly from the medical waste. So according to a study quoted by CBS News, around 8.5 million tons of plastics have been utilized associated with COVID-19. And it is estimated that around 57 million pounds of personal protective equipment, or PPE, has ended in the ocean. 46% of this pandemic plastic waste are generated in Asia. We have to turn the tide against the plastic pollution with the immediate effect. So now from CASA's or Minister of Environment and Waters Malaysia's perspectives, a wholesome approach must be taken to address this complexity of marine plastic pollution. So national policies must be cascaded down to state, local level, and community level for very meaningful implementation. Many actions are very ambitious and large at scale. We have to acknowledge that they take time. To supplement Malaysia's current initiative, National Marine Litter Policy and Action Plan 2021 till 2030 has been developed to guide actions with the overall aim to reduce marine litter and address plastic pollution. The policy is in line with the spirit of global regional measures. In fact, the policy development, we were guided by the existing regional instrument, such as the Asean Regional Action Plan to combat marine litter, to ensure that we are inconsistent. Creating awareness and instigating change should begin at home. Based on this spirit, CASA, Minister of Environment Malaysia, will create awareness on this issue from within CASA. And we have started by promoting no single-use plastics at government buildings. CASA has created the Blockbuster program in the ministry to tackle this issue and raise awareness. We'll widen this awareness and practice across the city of Putrajaya, where most of the government buildings are located. We will then support other cities to do the same. Where this will culminate as the state and national level initiative. Leading by example will be our focus in the immediate time. Let me also share some of the low-hanging fruits and short-term goals which Malaysia will implement soon. Tackles what we can first. In this context, first, I think we need to acknowledge that plastic is a part of consumers' lifestyle. It is embedded systematically in the society, and change of practices and lifestyle takes time. We must focus on tackling avoidable single-use plastics. In Malaysia, under the roadmap towards zero single-use plastic 2018-2030, we impose a minimum charge of 20 cents, and some states even as high as RM1 to deter the use of single-use plastic. The roadmap will be reviewed in 2026 to widen the coverage of single-use plastic to be addressed under the roadmap. Ban of plastic straws too are being implemented in eateries. The UK and in fact India, I think, is already moving towards banning single-use plates and cutleries. Some countries have banned microplastics in cosmetic too, like Sweden. We too, Malaysia, can emulate these moves soon. Prevent leakage and strengthen solid waste management. We need work on preventing solid waste leakage to the water bodies. 80% of the marine plastic litter is caused by leakage, poor management of solid waste, and stormwater, wind, and dumping practices that enters the ocean. The ecosystem and facilities that support waste segregation and recycling needs to be put in place in cities, covering more areas, including the suburbs. There are gaps in this practice now, and we hope to overcome this by cooperating with other ministries and state governments. Creating awareness at all levels and sense of care to the environment. Community level waste management must be strengthened through communication, education, and public awareness, or is known as SEPA, and a high sense of ownership. This initiative will be implemented with the right ecosystem and facilities for initiatives to come to fruition. Let me share the state of awareness level in Malaysia on climate change. Based on study conducted in July 2021, only 1% of Malaysians are worried about climate change. That is really worrying. Although this does not necessarily translate to level of awareness, it can be used as an indication of where we are in terms of the overall consciousness on environmental issue. On the other hand, Malaysia scored the first as compared to other 28 countries in terms of coronavirus awareness. So CASA, knowing this fact, will be embarking on many initiatives on top of implementing the Zero Single-Use Plastic Roadmap 2018-2030 and the National Marine Litter Policy Action Plan 2021-2030. In line with the government policy as enshrined in the 12th Malaysia Plan to implement circular economy to promote circularity of materials and reduce the use of virgin materials, the Plastic Sustainability Roadmap 2021-2030 will be implemented in tandem with the Marine Litter Policy. The Plastic Sustainability Roadmap 2021-2030 will be hinged upon the implementation of Extended Producers Responsibility, EPR, as the main tool to promote circularity. Currently, 10 businesses, organizations related to fast-moving consumer goods in Malaysia have come together in an alliance called Malaysian Recycling Alliance, or known as MAREA. MAREA will be conducting a pilot study next year to objectively determine how they can increase circularity in the plastic packaging material by addressing whole life of cycle approach or value chain. Innovative packaging materials based on recognized standards to replace conventional plastic packaging will be sought as part of the life cycle approach to minimize plastic waste. APR is currently implemented on a voluntary basis and will be made mandatory by the year 2026. The policy will support circularity through increase in plastic recycling. Based on World Bank study, recycling rate of four main plastics resins in Malaysia is around 24%. 63% of plastic waste were not recycled or disposed in proper facilities. The opportunity of harnessing USD 1.1 billion per year is yet to be realized. This opportunity can be tapped in the future. Plastic recycling in Malaysia will focus high plastics on waste from these sectors. 1, packaging. 2, electrical, electronic. 3, automotive. And the last is construction. Deterrent mechanisms such as island-free plastics or polluters pay principle, basically charge fee to people who cannot avoid to use avoidable plastic, will also be explored in the coming years. Putting in place data for monitoring and tracking for progress in addressing plastic pollution in marine litter is urgently needed, and we will work towards the building the database. Innovation, research, and technologies too will be encouraged to create solutions in many aspects of marine and plastic pollution, such as waste management, plastic clean up at ocean, monitoring of marine plastic pollution, recycling and innovation in green packaging. Low-hanging fruits, tapping into what can be done now. Parallel to the above initiatives, we too must not forgo conventional methods of addressing marine litter. We will engage with the communities of the sea, such as port authorities and fishermen, to retrieve and monitor plastic waste. Community-level initiatives can be implemented in other areas. Evaluating examples such as what some local council, like what is happening in Petaling Jaya, Penang Green Council, who have conducted the Under the Sea Circular project of Malaysia to facilitate recycling and promote circularity of plastics. A network of cities can be formed on this initiative. Plastic-free island is also an approach that can be quickly implemented through polluters pay principle with the agreement and cooperation of state governments. We can also explore using premises such as schools, municipal premises as facilities for collecting of materials for recycling. Current recycling rate in Malaysia is very low, and the potential is there to tap into the opportunity lost. Marine plastic pollution is a complex issue because there are many parties and jurisdictions involved. Comprehensive approach, policy, technology, awareness, and advocacy need to be implemented to yield results. Addressing it requires whole-of-nation approach and must be supported by sustainable financing and co-design solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dato' Jana, for that comprehensive overview of all your initiatives. I think that's very encouraging. I'd now like to turn over to Yutaka-san. Japan has led global efforts to reduce marine plastic pollution. Tell us a little bit more about your strategy.
Thank you. Japan commits quantitative milestones for reducing single-use plastic, promoting circular product design, increasing reuse and recycle of plastic, and so forth in the National Plastic Resource Circulation Strategy, which was established in 2019. And Japan established a new law on promoting plastic resource circulation this year to achieve these milestones. The law has constructed on the top of the EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility, legal frameworks, including resource circulation for package, and is strengthening incentive mechanisms for reducing single-use plastic. It also provides circular product design guideline for plastics to improve circularity of plastic value chain. Let me talk about national, regional, and global contribution of Japan Would it be possible to share my presentation slide? Thank you. Okay, regarding the G20 framework, the third G20 report on actions against marine plastic litter, which comprised policy measures from 42 countries, has published already. The report is a good information source of policy measures, and we all can learn from the report. In ASEAN, a regional knowledge center for marine plastic debris can share policy measures, monitoring data, good practices, and relevant scientific knowledge among ASEAN countries. Japan contributes to harmonization of ocean microplastic monitoring method by publishing the guidelines for monitoring method. And toward UNEA 5.2, Japan proposes a draft resolution on marine plastic pollution and aims at establishing an intergovernmental negotiating committee. Japan believes that we all have to scale up each country's efforts to global level by creating a global instrument for tackling marine plastic pollution. Next slide, please. I would like to talk about a bit the Japan's policy actions. First, partnership. We have a partnership with our industry in this year. We call it Japan Partnership for Circular Economy, J4CE. And now 131 companies and organizations are involved in participating in this partnership. And regarding the financial channel, we provide guidance of disclosure and engagement to accelerate sustainable finance for circular economy. And this guidance also includes the plastic issues. And finally, regarding the microplastics, we government provide good practices for tackling microplastics by industries and organizations. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yutaka-san, for that comprehensive overview of the legislative measures that you are taking, as well as the intergovernmental steering committee that's negotiating on that very key piece of legislation. I'd like to turn over to Amy now. We've heard a lot about the impact of plastic pollution on human health. Why should we care about the impacts to migratory species, and what are some of the broader implications?
Thank you so much, Jessica. I'm very pleased to join this distinguished group of speakers on this incredibly important topic. The Convention on Migratory Species is the only global agreement that is focused on migratory species and their habitats, and that includes birds, terrestrial animals, and aquatic species such as sharks, turtles, whales, and dolphins. Now, it's a good thing that plastic is now, the consciousness of plastic and plastic pollution is certainly at an incredible high now compared to where it was many years ago. But still the focus has been largely on impacts in the oceans. The fact is that we don't know a lot about it, but plastic is in fact having impacts not only in the oceans. Plastic, not all plastic reaches the oceans. So we have impacts that can affect species in freshwater and on land. Now, the first thing we have done on this in our role as protecting these species is try to fill those gaps and look at what do we know about impacts on those other species. We're very grateful to the government of Japan because CMS joined the Countermeasure 2 project to look at those impacts. And in September, we released a major report, the first ever on this topic. What we found is that, in fact, plastic pollution is clearly impacting land and freshwater species that are protected by our convention in the Asia-Pacific region. We also found that migratory species are likely to be among the most vulnerable to plastic pollution. To give an example, discarded fishing gear is posing a key threat to the survival of the Ganges River dolphin and the Irrawaddy dolphin in the Mekong. Plastic is also likely causing the highest number of dugong deaths, including in river deltas. Plastic pollution is also having negative impacts on many CMS bird species. And while there is insufficient evidence or research on terrestrial species, such as the Asian elephant, which was recently protected under our convention, the report found that plastic ingestion is likely to be adversely impacting a wide variety of land animals. Now, why should we care? Well, first, the direct impacts on protected species are causing mortality or additional stressors and contributing to their decline. This can impact people directly as well, with impacts on the fragile balance of ecosystems, loss of species that are sources of food for people or jobs, as well as prey for other species. Now, as I mentioned, it's of great concern that there is such little knowledge about the impact of plastics on freshwater and land species. For example, there are only 6 peer-reviewed studies on the impacts of plastic pollution on terrestrial species. This means that we don't really know what the impacts are on the land systems, on food systems, and of course on humans at the end of the day. So we are hoping to see a great deal more of research in this area. We also need to focus on actions upstream, and I'll be talking a bit later about that. What I want to point out here is that it's been an evolution between the concept of plastic as a good in the market to plastic as a pollutant. And that distinction is extremely important because when we talk about pollution, usually we talk about regulating that, we talk about examining the risks, we look at toxicity, and we look at laws. And in the case of plastic, that's been a long time coming. Plastic has been seen, and it is in many cases, a very good public benefit. For example, in the medical field, bringing lightweight and cheap means of sharing inoculations and vaccinations and so forth. But there are many, many uses, exponential amount of plastic in our markets. So we have to really take a much more comprehensive look and see what kind of uses are there, what are essential uses, what are the dangers of the kinds of plastic that are coming into our system, and then moving to do more to regulate it. So the fact is, to close on this question, migratory species are one part of our natural world in which we live. And if the plastic is impacting migratory species, we need to be concerned because it's impacting us. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much, Amy, for shining a spotlight on these unseen impacts, which are nevertheless so important to address, and also for highlighting that we are all interconnected in this ecosystem, and therefore it's such an important issue to take note of. I'm going to move over to Rolf now. The Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions have been useful legally binding frameworks that govern several aspects of the life cycle of chemicals and hazardous wastes, with the Basel Convention specifically governing the transboundary movements of hazardous waste and its disposal, as well as its impact on human health. What progress have you seen in the Asia-Pacific region with regards to plastic waste? And what do you think are some major obstacles that are still in the way of making real progress?
Thank you very much, Jessica, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone. It's indeed a pleasure to be here on this panel, and I would like to thank you and the organizers for inviting me. Now, in the region, we have 3 countries which are yet to be parties to the Basel Convention. So, and this is East Timor, Fiji, and Solomon Islands. And I would like to ask colleagues to encourage those countries to become parties to the Basel Convention. And of course, us at the Secretariat will be very happy to support those countries in engaging in a national dialogue, in a government dialogue, to see how they can become party to this very important convention, which today has 189 countries, so almost full ratification of the convention. Now, since January 2021, when the plastic amendments were entered into force, the legally binding provisions of the Basel Convention also applies to plastic waste. And as a result, countries from Asia and the Pacific that are parties to the Basel Convention are already taking measures, and this is very encouraging news, because we get feedback almost daily from different countries in the region and the different efforts they're taking to minimize the generation of plastic waste, to control the transboundary movement of plastic waste, and we've seen that in the news recently, and of course to promote the environmentally sound management of those types of waste through national initiatives, national measures, as we've heard from the government of Malaysia, the government of Japan. These are key areas where governments are intervening to address the issue. There is also the growing importance of extended producer responsibility, and I'm also glad to report that there are numerous initiatives in Southeast Asia which is looking at this, and we are encouraging countries to continue to do so. Now, within the ambit of the amendment, there was also the creation of a plastic waste partnership, which is indeed a multi-stakeholder platform with the objective to improve and promote this environmentally sound management of plastic waste, also in the Southeast Asian region. And 11 parties from the region are engaged now in the plastic waste partnership, and would like to invite more countries to join us. In fact, we have China, Bangladesh as two notable countries who are working with us in implementing national action, but also regional support in as we address the issue of plastics. We also have a number of projects that are being implemented in the Asian countries, such as in China, Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, Nepal, Maldives, Kiribati, Vietnam, and Myanmar. And of course, we can provide the details with these projects, but we don't have a lot of time this morning. But I just wanted to say that we are very closely engaged with countries in that very important region, and we're looking forward to continue to working with those countries. We also have a small grants program on plastic waste, and there we have also active countries such as Cambodia, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, India, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, and the Philippines. And in fact, we have a project in India which is looking at innovative approaches for improved plastic waste management in India. And one of the other areas where we're working with countries is looking at how we can manage single-use plastic and eliminate them completely. And for us, this is a very low-hanging fruit, and it's very important from a political perspective that we do bring under management single-use of plastic, because in our view, this is also one of the largest causes of impacts of plastics, especially in the oceans and in the big delta areas of Asia. So with those few points, I would just say that we are also undertaking a number of training. We have online MOOC training, and we are working together with several countries to ensure that also this training is available in the national languages, so that we can reach as much as possible, action on the ground. We're also working with a number of NGOs, not only governments, but NGOs, civil society, as we feel they're also part of the solution. In terms of working with the private sector, we feel that this is also critical and very important to engage with them, because in many ways they are part of the solution, and also hold in their hands the markets and the opportunities for us to look at alternatives, for us to look at how we can reduce cost effectively the dependence on single-use plastics, especially in the countries in the region. I will stop here and, of course, look forward to more questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rolf, for that overview. And I think it's so important, the conventions and the role it plays in addressing the issue of plastic waste in the region. And we've seen that progress made actually in Asia in the past couple of years due to that convention itself. So it's really encouraging to hear about the engagement with the governments as well as civic society and businesses. That's very important. I'd like to turn over to Tessa now. From the UNEP perspective, what are outcomes that you're hoping to see from this week's event? And what do you think are some of the immediate solutions that come to mind that can be implemented in the Asian context?
Thank you so much for the question, and thank you so much for inviting us to this important dialogue today. First of all, we are tremendously encouraged by all the action and the fantastic work that we have seen presented and delivered by various stakeholders this week from the region. So congratulations to the organizers for that. We're also very encouraged to see the high-level political commitment that was expressed at the Asia-Pacific Ministerial meeting on addressing the issue of plastic pollution. And as many of you will know, we have end of February the resumed session of the UN Environment Assembly coming up in Nairobi, our headquarters for UNEP. And we are seeing a growing momentum with, as Japan already indicated, currently resolutions being proposed, actually calling for an intergovernmental negotiating committee to look at the issue and to actually have an agreement, a global agreement on that and on the establishment of such an INC. So for us, UNEP, we are really keen to see ambitious action on marine litter and plastic pollution as we move forward, and we stand ready to support countries in the way they decide to do so. So in terms of solutions, we need to move on many fronts in this complex problem area. And first of all, we need to recognize that marine litter plastic pollution is a transboundary issue. Now, oceans are transboundary by nature. The way plastic leakage is actually moving from source to sea through the environment now makes it in its nature transboundary, but so is also the value chain of plastics. It's a global value chain, and the trade as well is global. So we need to recognize that whatever we do in the regions, in the countries, it also has importance to the global level. And therefore, we need all countries and all stakeholders to play their role. We need to stop the leakage to the environment, and we need to keep plastics in the economy. And I think Sea Circular is doing exactly that. It's a project that really focuses on reducing plastic at the source through market-based incentives, and also to promote circular approaches along the value chain. And we need more. We need also improved waste management systems. We just heard from Rolf Payet on that. The Plastic Waste Partnership is also a great effort in terms of trying to improve these waste management systems. And we need to engage with consumers. And consumers are all of us. Consumers are also governments themselves. We are all consumers of plastics, and we can make with our decisions and the way we spend our money, including public procurement, make a difference in the choices we make and what we are promoting in terms of markets and behaviors. So we also need to focus on the monitoring. The science and the data is really important, and I'm delighted to see that this is really stepped up in the Asia-Pacific region, and that we get more and more data and science actually directly from the regions. Countermeasure 2 is another project I really want to measure in that regard, looking at the plastic leakage along the Ganges and the Mekong. So it is wonderful to see the regions stepping up in these areas. And I would see now the expectation as the outcome for this week is really increased momentum and increased commitment for global and regional action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tessa, for summarizing the progress that has been made in the region and how far we have come, and also still some way to go yet. Last but certainly not least, I'd like to turn it over to Novrizal, and to give us the Indonesian perspective. What is Indonesia's strategy in the effort to reduce plastic waste and pollution?
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, excellencies, for all speakers. Indonesia's position on plastic waste and plastic pollution is clear and bold, since we commit strongly to decrease and eliminate plastic waste and plastic pollution in our country. We don't want plastic waste to pollute our environment and degrade our ecosystem, as well as generate human health risks. We also believe that plastic waste and plastic pollution could drop our economic competitiveness and advantage value, especially in tourism and hospitality industry. Indonesia has developed and implemented policy, regulation, and program to address this issue both at national level and local level. In international fora, both global and regional level, Indonesia has delivered strong message that Indonesia put plastic waste and plastic pollution issue on national priority by showing our commitment, effort, and achievement at any international meeting such as UNEA, UNEP, G20, EAS, and Asean. As a response to address this issue, Government of Indonesia has published 4 important regulations, including: first, President Regulation numbers 97 to year 2017 concerning national policy and strategy on solid waste management. This regulation is like a national roadmap to develop proper solid waste management in period of 2018 to 2025. Second, President Regulation number 83 year 2018 concerning handling of marine litter that contain national plan of action to reduce marine litter by 70% in 2025 by implementing collaborative action among 17 line ministry. Third, Ministerial Environment and Forestry Regulation number 75 year 2019 concerning roadmap of waste reduction by the producer that mandate the producer to be responsibility to reduce waste that generate from their product. We call extended producer responsibility. Packaging and service by implementing redesign, take back for recycle, and take back for reusing in the period 2020 until 2029, with reduction target by 30% in 2030. The last Ministerial Environment and Forestry Regulation number 14, 2021 concerning solid waste management through waste bank that regulate the implementation of community-based solid waste management and enhance the role of waste bank as waste separate collection point. There are 5 main programs that we are implementing now, including: first, developing regulation, standard, procedure, and criteria at national level. Second, improving the capacity of local government in managing waste by providing support and technical assistance in form of infrastructure, facility, machinery, subsidized training, and technical assistance. Increasing public awareness and engagement by implementing communication, information, and education activity. For enhancing producer responsibility and commitment by implementing waste reduction roadmap and circular economy. And the last, building international cooperation and partnership, both bilateral, multilateral, in several forums such as UNEA, UNEP, G20, East Asia, and ASEAN. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rizal, for that overview of Indonesia's strategies. I'd like to now broaden the conversation to all our panelists and also invite our audience here today to submit your questions in the comments chat, and we will be able to pick it up for our panelists. The first question that I would like to ask the panelists, and perhaps I can direct that to Yutaka-san, is that the G20 implementation framework for actions on marine plastic was launched 2 years ago in 2019. In the last 2 years, what do you think has been achieved, and do you think that there are some very gaps in the region now that we can maybe focus on to make more progress?
Thank you for your question. Yes, regarding the progress, the G20 implementation framework for marine plastic now has 42 countries' involvement, both within G20 and beyond G20, including 19 countries from Asia. As I mentioned, the third compilation report was published in July this year by support of Italy and Japan, and the report receives input from 13 UN organizations, multi-development banks, and NGOs. I would like to appreciate those participations and contribution to the report. Looking at analysis of the report, within 42 countries, 35 countries have the legal framework for marine plastic litter. More than 2/3 have policy actions on reducing single-use plastic, improving recycling, cleanup activities, monitoring, and awareness raising. I believe the G20 framework would gain further participation of countries, since 87 countries and regions have already shared and supported Osaka Blue Ocean Vision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kind of building on that question, when we look at the regulatory frameworks in the region, I'm just wondering, what are some areas that we can perhaps encourage governments to move a little quicker on? I think we've talked about extended producer responsibility and how that is still in infancy in its region. And I wondered if there was an opportunity to accelerate that kind of legislation in the region. I wondered if the panelists had a view on this. Perhaps I can get Rolf to share his thoughts. Rolf, I think you're on mute.
Okay. Yes, my thoughts is really focused. I mean, as I mentioned before, we need this. We need government commitment, but also the commitment of everybody, because the whole aspect of dealing with plastic is across the board. We cannot leave anyone out, because the way plastics is used and consumed, it's important that we have the engagement of all stakeholders, and this is something which we feel is very important as we move towards both a global solution in terms of the negotiations for an international treaty, which several countries have will put before UNIA. In terms, we have a resolution now, but in terms of the practicality of addressing the issues, we need all stakeholders, and this is evident even in our panel today, where we have stakeholders from various aspects of government, UN organizations, but also I think we emphasize again the role of the private sector and other agencies in this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You speak about the role of the private sector, and I think that's very important here. And while we don't have private sector representation on this panel, I think that all of us can agree that they have to be part of the solution. Tessa, perhaps I can come to you to offer a view on how the private sector really can be engaged to be aligned on the same kind of outcomes that the legislative frameworks are aiming for.
Thank you so much for your question. Yes, absolutely. I think it's key that multi-stakeholder engagement is driving forward the decision making, and the private sector plays an important role in here. So I think one way in which we are engaging on that is kind of through bringing together stakeholders through, for example, the multi-stakeholder fora, and one was hosted by Japan this year, which we supported, and where we really can have the exchange on where the challenges are, but also where the opportunity space is. The private sector is part of the solution. So also it's important to engage and see where the ambition can be stepped up. We all have a role to play, and some of the impacts that we are currently seeing from plastic pollution, really the burden falls on those that have least been involved in creating it. So the other aspect that is critical is that we provide a framework that facilitates the engagement and optimizes the opportunities through the solution through the private sector by providing, for example, a clear framework within which to operate. This can promote innovation, this can help create markets. And as such, for example, we see good examples of public-private partnerships in the waste management at different levels, but we also see the need to really think through the whole life cycle and the whole value chain on, for example, more sustainable financing. And I understand that you've been speaking a lot this week also around extended producer responsibility, but there's also the aspect of the risk themselves and how these would in the end turn into a liability. In that sense, the industry, the finance industry, but also the insurance industry is an interesting sector to look at and to work with. Just as an example, modeling studies show that in the business of usual, by 2040, we would see an annual risk of 100 billion US dollars to the private sector if governments would insist on them to cover the waste management costs under the current expected volumes and recycling rates that we have today. So these are really very important questions to all of us, but certainly also to the private sector to look into. And in that sense, I also would like to highlight the work that we do with the New Plastics Economy Global Commitment led by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in collaboration with UNEP, striving to tackle the plastic pollution at its source. And through the commitment, actually 80 leading companies from the plastic value chain and investors are advocating for a global agreement on plastics. And finally, I would like to also point out the opportunity to harness the digital transformation by collaborating with private sector entities. For example, on the issue of data, there's a huge wealth of information out there, but it's fragmented, it's at different levels and so on. And in that regard, I would like to also point to our efforts under the Global Partnership on Marine Litter to actually set up a stakeholder space for interaction and sharing and having access to resources, as well as a digital platform to bring together data. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tessa, for giving us those insights. And I think, you know, the highlight on the frameworks from which to engage the private sector is so important, as well as the sustainable financing pathways that are available for them. And then, of course, on digital transformation and data and the use of these solutions in addressing the problem. Perhaps I could go to Datuk Jana. You know, how is CASA addressing or engaging the private sector? And are there any successful frameworks that you have used that could be an example for the rest of Asia?
What CASA is doing now is basically we are trying to engage as much as possible with the private sectors. It is not only the producers of the plastic, but also other users, the companies and all that. Of course, one big program will be through, of course, EPR, where we have got about 10 players to be involved in the EPR program, but we are extending it. We are trying to kind of encourage them, more companies to come in, and we are also trying to tie it up with some other incentives through the government, incentivize them for the next 3 years. Basically, we are looking at up to the year end 2025 to handle them and to go with us on more on a voluntary basis before making it into mandatorily getting them involved to be responsible totally on the plastic use. So these are the things that we are doing, but we are, we are engaging ourselves very often with the private sectors and getting to move with the government in reducing this issue.
I'm curious, so when you move from voluntary to mandatory, have you experienced resistance from the private sector, and how have you dealt with that?
No, I'm sure there will be resistance, but we are giving them enough time, and in fact, we are talking them, engaging ourselves with them and getting them to be prepared. In fact, we have given them right up about 5 years. The whole duration will be about 5 years. We started this move in 2018. So by 2025, is in fact more than 5 years. I think they should be ready. The market should be ready to accept this. And and with the focus, so much of focus on this now, I think the producers are quite aware, and many of them, in fact, they go into that or they change the substance into much more friendlier environment materials to be used. And this again, we are looking into on a yearly basis budget and how the other government machineries can also be an assistant to that. So by that, I believe that there will be more awareness, and they will be working with the government and people to get this problem solved.
Thank you so much. I think they have more than enough time to prepare. Perhaps, Nofrizal, would you like to offer some thoughts on how Indonesia engages its private sector to be part of the solution?
Yes, thank you, Jessica. Under the regulation extended producer responsibility, I think we have good commitment from the private sector in Indonesia. Right now, some private sector already sent the roadmap of the plan to reduce the plastic packaging and waste from the producer, from the private sector. This is the more important. The second, concerning the role playing of the resources industry in helping to achieve the target, we think that the recirculating material cut CO2 emission and require much less energy than used bridging material. So we do believe that the implementation of circular economy will be a powerful tool for climate mitigation. So I think the extended producer responsibility regulation is the roadmap as important role as a new platform to implement and accelerate circular economy in Indonesia. So I think it's the response. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nofrizal. Amy, I'd like to come to you. I mean, having heard from all the other panelists, what do you think are some of the next urgent steps that we need to take with respect to plastic pollution and migratory species?
Well, thank you very much. And what will help migratory species will help all other species, including humans. And that's the connection I was talking about earlier. But in short, I think we all agree that actions to address this global issue have fallen far short of what is needed. And it's good to see, finally, discussion around this concept of plastic as a pollutant rather than as a good. It's an extremely important shift in thinking and in terms of how we advance solutions. But I want to say that waste management, while important, circular economy steps, while important, it's still not going far enough. The fact is, plastic has grown exponentially in our markets and in our environment. It's incorporated in an ever-growing list of products, production lines, supply chains, consumer expectations from businesses, major companies, major products, transport, and everyday consumers. So to change that will really require taking a comprehensive look at the pathways of plastic into our environment. And we have to ask questions that one would ask about any dangerous pollutant. So for example, what are essential uses? What are not essential uses? What kind of plastic are we talking about? What's the toxicity risks of that plastic? What is the life expectancy of the product that plastic is used in? Are there adequate recycling or disposal options for it or not? what items should be banned. So what is needed includes significantly more research on impacts. As I mentioned, there are very few studies on impacts on non-aquatic species. So impacts on soil, on the food web, and on humans. The global agreement that's being discussed under the UNEA that's coming up is an extremely positive step. But as I've mentioned, it must go beyond waste management. We have to go beyond a few single-use plastics and really be aiming at severely reducing the amount of plastic entering the market to begin with. Of course, we'll need national policies and regulations, and banning of single-use items that are outside of compelling end uses, such as the medical uses I've mentioned. Financial incentives, you could look at reflecting full cost in the pricing. Taxes, fees for recovery of plastic. The private sector, of course, is driving the exponential growth of plastic, so the private sector must be involved in reversing that. And there can be a lot of innovation in terms of, in particular, alternatives to the kinds of plastics that we're seeing causing such a problem. Finally, education, consumer choice, and political support, making this really an important issue in our decision-making and for our leadership. But thanks for the question. And again, very delighted to be part of this wonderful group.
Thank you so much, Amy, especially for highlighting that we need to go beyond circular economy approaches right to the source and how we actually think about the use of that material. I think that point is not brought up enough, so thank you for highlighting that. We have some questions coming in from our participants today, and the first question I'd like to direct to Rolf. Can you please explain how the Basel Convention's Plastic Waste Partnership and the Global Plastic Action Partnership differ in their scope of work?
Okay, well, they don't. The thing is, the Plastic Waste Partnership is set up by the Conference of the Parties. That means it is country-driven. It is established as a partnership between the countries, the private sector, and other stakeholders. So in a way, it's a unique setup which provides first a platform for all the constituents or all the actors to join together. And also it's a platform where they prioritize areas for action, because there's a lot of action we can do, but we need to prioritize. I think that's a very important issue. And when all these stakeholders come together, they are able to prioritize as per their regional needs, as per the global needs, and also as per the local needs. And I think fourthly, one important area here that we're exploring is the exchange of ideas, knowledge, and practices, because there's been successful initiatives in many countries which has allowed people to have this responsibility for their waste, which allow the private sector to take responsibility for the waste that they create. And these examples present an opportunity for other countries to see how they can implement. And some of the examples are not very costly. They don't involve intense regulation. They are usually based upon simple economic incentives. They also depend upon simple technology transfer. So these are the opportunities that I think we should be looking at. I mean, we have some countries who've replaced, for example, plastic-based disposable, eating, because this is very important. Food is very important in Asia, you know that. And they've replaced a lot of the receptacles for, takeaways and single use with plant-based replacement. Of course, there could be impacts in terms of biodiversity, but I think the thinking here is for us to look at how we can make use of, some types of biodegradable materials in the replacement of this. And this is just one example, but I think the Plastic Waste Partnership has this breadth and commitment of countries as well as the other stakeholders.
Thank you so much for your answer. We have a question here for Tessa, and it's actually a question from one of the previous speakers whose recommendation was for all UN bodies and institutions to align and cooperate more as plastics touch on various issues from human rights to UN SDGs and climate change, as well as biodiversity. So can you speak to the collaborative efforts to avoid reinventing the wheel at so many levels?
Thank you very much for the question. It's an excellent question, and I think now the marine litter and plastic pollution issue really touches upon many aspects of the economy, society, and the environment. So it is a multifaceted problem, and it requires well-coordinated multilateral solutions across the life cycle. So we need to engage with multiple actors at multiple levels, and we definitely also need to engage so within the UN system. So it's an excellent question, and as we speak, we are actually looking into ways to unite the UN system around this topic together with other stakeholders, so that we can now have joint efforts towards this problem. The health dimensions are there, the trade dimensions, human rights, as you have pointed out, agriculture, fisheries. There's many sectors engaged as well. So this issue of plastic pollution goes well beyond the environment domain alone. I think we also see that in the evolution of the resolutions that we've seen at UNIA, starting off very much from the marine impact perspective, but increasingly also now looking at sustainable consumption and production and the chemicals issues, for example. So just to reassure that actually, as we speak, we are looking into how we can best unite our efforts within the UN together with stakeholders to address this challenge of plastic pollution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tessa, for the encouraging sharing about how you're coordinating your policies internally and engaging external stakeholders as well. We have a question here for Norizal, and the question is, can you please clarify how far Indonesia is in terms of establishing its own EPR regulation and its plan for rollout and enforcement?
Yes, thank you for the question, Jessica. Yes, we already have the extended producer responsibility regulation we established in the end of the year 2019. Now we establish the extended producer responsibility regulation in the roadmap methodology. So we make in 10 years the roadmap. So we have a step-by-step for the roadmap. For example, into 2020, this is a socialization, dissemination of the regulation. In 2021, all the producer, all the private sector will have to send the roadmap document to the central government. So in January 2022, still start to the pilot plan. So full implementation in the 1 January in 2023. So we have some matters in the extended producer responsibility EPR regulation. For example, we will passing out some item in the single-use plastic. For example, plastic single-use plastic bag, cutlery, plastic straw, and polystyrene for the food packaging. We will passing out in the January 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norizal, for those insights. We have a question here now for Amy. How can countries apply appropriate measures to strengthen species conservation policies that are in line with regional strategic direction to address the marine litter issue?
Yes, thanks for that question. Well, they're absolutely in line. The efforts under the Regional Seas programs and under global efforts to reduce marine litter are clearly complementary to efforts that we need to be taking and are taking in many areas to work on the conservation of those species. So plastic pollution is just one of many threats to migratory species. And under the Convention for Migratory Species, we deal at both the global, regional, and very local level. So it's extremely important to identify within a country what are the species that are impacted, what is the status of the species, and what role is plastic playing in terms of potential impacts. There's some very clear examples when we look at critically endangered or endangered species that are protected by the Convention on Migratory Species. And those would be a priority, of course, for looking at impacts of plastic pollution as well. In terms of the habitat, that's another area that needs attention because it's not just the species in and of themselves, but the habitats in which they live. And so looking at those upstream issues in terms of what we need to do to ensure that they're in healthy ecosystems that are free of pollution is, of course, essential, not only for the species protected under our convention, but many others. The one other point I'd like to add is, as we think about solutions to this very challenging problem, I think we shouldn't just think about replacing plastic, but I think we need to go back and remember what it was like before plastic. So, for example, before there were plastic straws, we were able to drink out of a cup or a can. It was possible. And before there were plastic water bottles, people got water out of faucets, and we focused on infrastructure for clean, fresh water that you could get at a fountain and fill up, your own vessel. So I think we shouldn't just think of replacing, but thinking about our whole model of how we use goods, and we have so much innovation. I'm sure we'll find solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy, for that answer. There's a question here that's quite interesting, and it's specifically on Vietnam. And it's just issued new regulation on EPR under its environmental law. And the question here is, and I'll pose this to anyone who might want to answer that, what is your advice on the strategies to get international brands to engage effectively into country EPR programs? Any thoughts here?
International brands.
Perhaps Tessa, I can direct that question to you.
Thank you for the question. I believe there were others speaking specifically to the EPR issue who also may want to step in on answering this. But certainly,
Tessa, I think you're on mute. Could you unmute yourself? Yeah,
okay,
thank you. You're good now.
My apologies. I'm sure some of the other panelists may want to come in on this one, Jessica, as well, as they were already speaking from EPR and from their experience. So I don't know if you first want to invite one of the other panelists to maybe speak to this particular topic.
Any of the other panelists would like to venture a stab at this question? Rolf, I saw you unmute yourself, so I can invite you.
Thank you, Jessica. Well, the thing is, we need to approach them. I mean, at the end of the day, when we set up those EPR mechanisms, they are also engaged, they are also affected, but they also have a stake in the whole process. So and brands are very sensitive to the way their brands are perceived in public, are perceived to consumers. So in my experience, we find that those big brands, really come forward. And here in Geneva, for example, we've been discussing with Nestle, for example, who's a large multinational company with a very powerful brand, on how EPR can work on the basis of the products that they produce. So, and they are very keen, and they even have dedicated people who are working on these areas. And this is just one example. And Nestle is found around the world, and in Asia as much as, even in the small islands, you'll find Nestle products. So again, I think there is this very important intent by the private sector. Now, working with them, of course, needs some arrangements because they work very different from the way governments and even international organizations work. But I think there is scope for working, especially with those regional head offices, which are perhaps far from the headquarters here in Geneva, and where they understand the local context very well. And I think there's fantastic opportunities there to be explored.
Thank you so much, Rolf. And I agree with you, because on Eco-Business, we have been covering this issue extensively, and we've seen the likes of the NGOs, I guess shaming the international brands, finding Coca-Cola bottles or PepsiCo or Unilever packets in very remote islands and areas. And that kind of reputational risk that international brands face today are very real. So thank you for highlighting that. Perhaps I can throw this question to the panelists, and it's related to one that we got previously, which is that international brands, say that they have the intention and the effort, but they cannot find alternatives. And there was this question here, which was that, it would be best if we can find alternatives or reduction of plastic products from upstream and taking into account global trade and value chains. But do we have the solutions for that today? And I would like to throw that open to anyone who might want to answer.
Okay, well, I think I'll take and then I'll let the others talk. I think there are many, many solutions available. The challenge with industry, obviously, is changing their manufacturing processes, is changing their distribution processes. But one area where they can make significant action today is in packaging. I mean, we all go to the supermarkets, and it's outrageous the amount of packaging that we have to deal with. And for me, many of this packaging is not really necessary. I mean, there is, of course, the health consideration, but sometimes there are products with 3 packages, and finishing with plastic packaging, and then finishing with the paper packaging. And I'm sure this is also a widespread experience in Southeast Asia. So let's start with packaging. And I think then we can start moving the needle when we start looking at how we can reduce packaging. And I think there's a lot of efforts done by some major supermarkets, but I think it's not enough. We need more focus, and the technology is available. Perhaps especially, for some perishable foods, this is a different context, but for many of the other off-the-shelf goods, which have a long shelf life, I think packaging can be addressed effectively.
Thank you.
Now.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
I wanted to come in on that too, if I could.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, well, just 2 points. One, I think there's also going to be a need to address, in terms of the brand and marketing, the labeling issue in terms of what companies claim and what's a positive criteria for what they're achieving. So I think we already start to see that. If you look at some consumer products, you'll see, X% recycled material, or this or that, or this is, fully compostable. But we don't have yet is agreement on what's the target there. What is the behavior we want to reward? And until we have that, I think there'll be a lot of very confused consumers who are trying to do the right thing if we don't know really what is the standard that we're aiming at. And in terms of the alternatives, as I said, we should definitely not think of just replacing what's on the market, but look at different, really looking upstream. I'll just, again, bring the water example, because I was traveling in South America some years ago. I won't say which country, but I was very happy to find in the middle of the town square a beautiful public water fountain, and it said potable water. And the fact is, if we're assuming that we're going to have plastic water, water in plastic bottles, and that's our source of water, that we go to a supermarket to get our water, we're going to take money away from ensuring investment in delivery of clean water to the communities that need it, where you have no plastic involved. So that's the kind of thinking that's needed, is to really go back in time, go forward in time, get outside of the box, and not just replace something. And it's clearly achievable.
Thank you, Amy, for bringing that up. And that's very interesting because, you know, in Singapore, where I live, we used to have these water fountains in certain areas, but they have now all been closed up due to COVID. And so then, you know, I think the pandemic has posed really kind of real challenges in terms of public health. I wonder, did you have a view on that?
My view on that? Well, of course, we have to look at public safety. So those are other compelling circumstances, but there's no reason why we shouldn't have good public drinking water. You know, if there are not other risks such as a pandemic, which is hopefully something that's going to be overcome soon across the world.
Yes, thank you, Amy. Tessa, I saw you unmuted there. Would you like to offer some thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much. I really concur with a previous speaker on kind of now looking at where we can innovate in terms of avoiding kind of avoidable plastic use and also unnecessary plastics. It's not always a material alternative. It's also services that can come into play. Or as the example given by Amy, that there's a complete different structure rather than bottles. There's a kind of a common source, but certainly also the change of business models. So I think there's a huge win to be reached, and I think they are all along the life cycle. You can think about modular design to improve reuse. And you can also look all the way back at feedstock, because most of the plastic at the moment is fossil fuel based. And very, very, very low percentage is not. But there is a lot of research ongoing. There's a lot of interesting science ongoing that we really need to keep an eye on. And of course, there's also the issue on the plastic products themselves and the use of additives. There's so many different types of plastics because of these and because of all the different properties that we want to see in our packaging materials and so on, that I think there's a will to be won there as well. And also these are the kind of things that impede, for example, the enhancement of recycling rates. And on top of that, some of these additives are actually known to be harmful to human health and the environment. So again, I really think there is a huge kind of jump to be made if we would more look into those issues and also kind of invest into more green and sustainable chemistry, for example. But notwithstanding all the other very important points where it's really about informing consumers, consuming choices, producer responsibility, and also making sure that we don't embark on regrettable alternatives. And in that sense, things like life cycle analysis are also very, very helpful in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tessa. Just building on that point, there is a question here about Southeast Asia, and that observation is that many regions except for Southeast Asia have a regional treaty or bilateral agreements on marine conservation or the protection of marine environment or sea areas, MPAs perhaps. And efforts in Southeast Asia have not been as successful. So do the panelists think that the issue of plastic solution at sea could be a start towards such an effort? I suppose a regional ASEAN framework is the question. Dato' Jana, maybe I can come to you.
Of course, I think as ASEAN, as a country part of the in the ASEAN effort, it can be a move for us to work together in this particular aspect. But that's how I think the ASEAN countries can work together, but not on a bigger scale yet. Right, that's my opinion on that.
Thank you. And Nofrizal, you have a view here from Indonesia?
Yes, thank you, Jessica. I think I agree with the Dato' Jana opinion. We have to collaborate in the ASEAN region, I think. So we have to make the good collaboration to reduce the plastic pollution in the ASEAN region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With an eye on the time, I'd like to pose a final question to all our panelists. We've just had, the backdrop of COP26 being concluded and the Glasgow Climate Pact, and we had seen the momentum of net zero commitments. What kind of commitments do you hope to achieve at the Sea of Solutions that you think will help us to make meaningful progress? And perhaps I can invite you, Taka-san, to start off first. Yutaka-san?
Yes, thank you very much. I think including the ASEAN's connectivity or cooperation, this kind of conference, all I thought will connect to the global instrument for tackling plastic pollution. And the UNEA 5.2 is a very important occasion to start the negotiation for creating international agreement. Yes, and I think ASEAN connectivity and cooperation, this relation is a very important building block for constructing global instrument. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yutaka-san. I think the global agreement in February next year is something that will be very closely watched by all parties. Thank you for that. Novriza, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Jessica. I think we have some existing convention and agreement, right? Like a Basel Convention, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention. I think first we have to maximize the existing convention first. The second, I think we think to move to another convention like international agreement about the marine plastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Amy, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think this conference has been incredibly effective at really trying to talk about plastic in a way that it hasn't been before. And so I think, looking at, again, at that upstream discussion, looking at plastic as a pollution issue and not as an alternative to, glass or, metal, or, this is an issue about health. It's an issue about the health of our planet. And I think the lessons from this conference will absolutely be vital for the discussions that will be happening in Nairobi in February. So I just want to really congratulate you and all the organizers of this, because I think there's great messages that will come. The ASEAN region, the other point I'd make is just, really outreach and education is also really key. And I think that's something that hasn't been discussed on our panel, but through the news, through the schools and communities, that's something that will really affect change. Especially when children are engaged with something, they'll remind their parents and their friends what they should be doing. So, but thanks again, and I think these lessons will be brought into the next forum.
Thank you so much, Amy, for those wonderful insights. I will now go over to Rolf.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I think I will just highlight three important areas in my closing remarks. I think the first one is to get our countries to find their own national ways of dealing with single-use plastics, as this is one of the largest visible impacts of plastics in the region, especially in the ocean areas, but also, as I said before, in the deltas. And here I must highlight, the region has really extensive mangroves and wetland systems. And this is one of the most difficult areas to go and document, the amount of plastics there. And of course, it's one of the areas also which traps plastics, because it is designed to trap all sorts of things coming from inland. So I think by taking national measures to deal with single-use plastics will go a long way. And for us, it's a very easy low-hanging fruit. And I think government should start putting in processes that deals with this. The second one, of course, is setting up national targets. And I think this is useful to work towards, because then once you have a national target in a particular, because plastic is very complex, you cannot deal it as one thing. I mean, by our count, there's 150,000 types of plastics available. Maybe not all of them are available in all the countries, but this is the amount of different types of plastics when it comes to additives, different uses and everything. But I think we can start looking at some of the waste streams and seeing how, in terms of national targets, we can address those. And finally, as suggested, implementation of the conventions is, I think, important. Basel Convention is the primary one now, and I think a number of countries need the support in terms of capacity building, in terms of strengthening import, export regulations, and expertise. And I think this is a very important area. And of course, the other conventions, as Stockholm is already starting to look at plastics, especially plastic additives that are toxic, and the exposure to vulnerable people in society, such as children, pregnant women themselves, and of course the elderly. So I think this we have our work cut out for us in addressing plastics, but there's a lot that can be done now as we also enter into these global negotiations for a global treaty. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Ralph, for that very action-oriented answer. Much appreciated. I'll turn it over to Datuk Jana now.
Thank you. But my final say will be this, but I think it's a coordinated effort between all the ASEAN countries. Of course, every country will have their national targets, but I think as a nation, as a member of the ASEAN, I would urge that all the members of ASEAN members work together in curbing this issue. But of course, on a bigger scale, then we have this global plastic agreement, which is incoming in our UNIA 5.2, which will be held in February, I suppose. That I think is important, and the act should be drafted in a wholesome manner to guide global actions to tackle this issue. So it will be in both prone manner that it's done on a individual countries, on a regional manner, and on a bigger scope through UNIA 5.2. That will be our wish in addressing this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jana, for the aspirational wish. And Tessa, last but certainly not least.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And as you put the backdrop, the COP26, perhaps I can also pick up on another comment, a question that came through the chat. I think it is very important that we take a holistic view on the whole issue. So indeed, the plastic-related emissions under current circumstances may increase up till 19% of our carbon budget in 2040 if we don't take action now. So it's the pollution aspect, but there's other elements as well, and there's also the biodiversity impact. We heard about health risks and so on. And also there's elements of how much our planet is able to continue sequester carbon. Actually, we have increasing science picking up that actually it may affect the ability of our ecosystems to sequester carbon. I know that's from the marine, but I hear Amy, and we need more studies on land as well. So for me, also three main points. First of all, I hope as a commitment that this event will keep our focus on solutions, but with good understanding of what the impacts are and where we need to prioritize. And in that regard, I also echo the point made earlier that this would hopefully inform the ability for us to set targets and to commit to work collectively into the same direction to resolve the problem and the issue at stake, whether it is in the area of directing finance, policy, partnership, or youth engagement. No, we need to work together and in the same direction to kind of really come up with urgent action. And then finally, of course, we are very encouraged to see the momentum building for an ambitious global action to turn the tide on marine litter and plastic pollution. So we look forward to a successful and ambitious conclusion at UNIA 5.2. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tessa, for so eloquently summing it up. And on that note, I would like to thank all our distinguished panelists for all your insights today. I've learned so much from you. And of course, we have a lot of work to do in the region, but what we've seen, though, is very, very encouraging. And I'd like to commend also the organizers for hosting the SeaOS Solutions this week. So thank you so much for your participation. To our audience, please stay tuned. Don't go away. Please join the final session where Voices for Acceleration and key messages will be featured. And you can join this next session in just under 30 minutes by visiting the stages section of this platform. So we'll see you there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Jessica.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moderator.
Thank you, everyone.